What is going on, YouTube? Andrew Miller from Hook'emHeadlines.com coming back at you today. I wanted to talk about the commitment that Texas landed today at the All-American Bowl from four-star Waco Connally linebacker slash athlete slash defensive back Jelani McDonald, the former Oklahoma State commit. Wanted to dig into kind of what he brings to the table for Texas, his journey to committing to Texas, and where his long-term fit is with the program. So we can start out here how he ended up at Texas and how his recruitment progressed through the last few months. So he's initially a four-star commitment to Oklahoma State. He was one of the early evaluations that Mike Gundy and the Pokes have become so famous for in and around the state of Texas. He brings a ton of speed to the table, kind of stands out physically, and I think that's what largely drew Oklahoma State to him. But he was a senior eval that really stood out for a lot of other programs, and his recruitment started to pop off a bit nationally around September, October. One of the schools that was drawn to him was Texas. He ended up getting his Texas offer officially in November, kind of around a similar time period when like TCU, Ole Miss, and like Texas Tech were starting to push harder for him. Ultimately, around November and December, it was a top three of Oklahoma State, Texas, and TCU that were involved for McDonald. And he took multiple visits to TCU, to Texas. He even took some to Oklahoma State during the fall. They were still involved after he backed off his pledge. I believe that was mid-November, late November, around that time. That's when Texas was starting to look like a serious threat. Now, I will say that there was an unofficial visit that happened in November. It was the first after Texas was really starting to push for McDonald that didn't really seem like it hit the way that Texas wanted. It just didn't really connect the way that I thought it would, with Texas putting so much interest into McDonald as a senior eval. At that point, it really started to look like TCU was picking up some steam, and a successful visit was it a couple weeks later to TCU, to Fort Worth, for me really seemed like it solidified McDonald to TCU. That wound up not being the case. I don't know if it was because of numbers. That certainly could have played a role, but TCU started to let off the gas a little bit with McDonald. Texas wound up hosting him for a really successful official visit on the last weekend before signing day, during the early signing period last month, and I think that's what largely sealed the deal here. Jeff Choate, Sark, PK really did a nice job with the pitch here of kind of having McDonald play this hybrid linebacker safety role, maybe eventually edge rusher. We'll get into the long-term positional fits later in the video, though. But I think a lot of that pitch had a lot to do with why Texas was able to get Jelani to sign on the dotted line. He did sign during the early signing period on December 21st. Just waited to announce his commitment publicly until the All-American Bowl today. Committed this afternoon. So it was a little bit of twists and turns at the end with Jelani, but ultimately Texas was able to get him in the 2023 class despite having what is now well north, I believe, of 24 linebackers and edge rushers. So, they they have a really, I think, specific plan in mind for him, and he's one of the most gifted kind of long-term developmental pieces in this class, so it's not like he's just another number. I think there's a specific path for him. But yeah, let's talk about kind of what he brings to the table, what his game is like coming out of Waco Connally. So he plays both sides. He played both sides of the ball at Connally. On offense, mostly quarterback. Definitely one of a dual threat nature. In a lot of coverage on the side, I mentioned the speed that he brings to the table. That is definitely something you will notice on film with him. He's got a decent arm, but definitely the speed and kind of some of the field vision too. Just the overall gifts that he has really are what shine on film. But, I mean, he's not going to end up being a quarterback for Texas. His positional fit, again, we'll dig more into it later, but that'll definitely be on the defensive side of the ball. And that's where a lot of his defensive versatility and just like multiplicity, I like to say, comes into play. And so he played most of his snaps kind of as a hybrid linebacker, similar to what Texas is pitching him as, but it's going to be different in terms of his role at Texas, I think, at least in the near term. But he really excelled as kind of this off-ball, plugging the gaps, run-stopping linebacker. I'll use this term a little bit during the video, but I've heard this thrown around a lot, that Jelani is definitely somewhat of a chess piece, and that's partly how Connally used him. Again, kind of a hybrid off-ball linebacker, mostly playing closer to the line of scrimmage. He wasn't asked to do a ton of pass rushing. He ended the 2022 season, his senior campaign, with just 4 sacks. 4 sacks. I'm thinking of interceptions here, getting wires crossed. But yes, he ended with 4 sacks. Double-digit QB pressures, but again, limited pass rush film, considering there could be a long-term fit at edge rusher. But again, we'll dig in more to that later. He did end up with double-digit tackles for loss, somewhere in the ballpark of 25 to 30 combined tackles. He's the one that can blow up plays in opposing teams' backfield, especially when coming off the boundary as a run stopper. He's got insane ranginess. Sideline to sideline speed is unquestioned. Change of direction is really good. Flat out speed is just really good. His one thing that really does impress me on film is how much he can play downhill. He's a guy that has some real pops of the pads. He doesn't shy away from contact. For a guy that's 6'3", 190, that's sometime, especially an athlete, plays quarterback, that could be a little bit of a concern of kind of translating that part of his game to the next level, but I don't think physicality is a question for Jelani. But the last part kind of his defensive game, and probably the most questionable part at the moment, is pass coverage. He was put into coverage situations a bit at Connally. He finished the year with 1 interception, I believe a couple pass breakups, but overall, he wasn't like a man on, or like put in man coverage one-on-one all that much. There's some film out there of him doing that, but that's where I have a lot of that's where I think some of the more questionable areas of his game are, where he'll need a little bit more development, is in pass coverage. I say that, and I'll use this as a transition point to kind of talk about what I've seen from him in a camp. I've covered him at 1 camp in person and seen 1 game in person. I know there's people that have covered him in person a lot more than I have, but I think I have enough to confidently say that he is rapidly improving in pass coverage. During the All-American Bowl practice week, he was pretty much solely competing as a defensive back. And yes, while you could tell that his coverage skills are still pretty raw, could use some refinement, he's got a lot of speed to him. The foot speed is there to keep up with some of the better wide receivers in this class, some of the quicker ones. The physicality too. I think kind of some of the hip turning, some of the timing, ball skills and adjustments when the ball's actually in the air, those are aspects of his game that, just in terms of feel, are going to take a little bit more time. But again, he's more of a long-term developmental player, so I think all of that's okay. And the trajectory he's on right now is pretty solid when it comes to the coverage part of his game. Now, again, kind of transition to how he fits at Texas, and kind of what the long-term plan for him will be. And there is going to be a certain aura of mystery to this, because depending on how the Texas defense evolves under PK for the next few years, that could change a little bit of where they like to scheme up Jelani McDonald. So, by my understanding with the pitch they made to him, it's this kind of hybrid linebacker, DeMarvion Overshone, Maurice Blackwell type role, at least in the near term. That he's going to kind of be playing this hybrid will linebacker position. Probably I think they'll try to get him up around 6'3", 215, maybe 220, to be able to compete more from a physicality perspective in the Power 5 and eventually the SEC. He doesn't quite have the size yet to compete in the trenches, even in run-stopping situations, with bigger offensive linemen. Size-wise, muscle mass-wise, he's just not there yet. Again, I think a year or 2 he could get there. Now, there is more of a long-term approach here where he could be more of an edge rusher, but I'll work my way into that. So, as a hybrid linebacker, kind of this will linebacker type, for one, his ranginess, his ability to cover the field sideline to sideline, and just the way he can run downhill, just cover ground in the blink of an eye, blow up the play in the backfield, chase down that ball carrier. That is something that can make an impact here pretty quickly. Where you see kind of like DeMarvion Overshown being able to move around the field in different packages in different ways to be able to like really put some pop on opposing ball carriers for negative plays. That's where I think you're going to see a lot of these special physical tools that McDonald brings to the table utilized. That's where I think the bulk of his value will be short term. Also, I mentioned Maurice Blackwell earlier. I think a lot of the value that Blackwell brings for Texas is his ability to drop back into pass coverage. He's a converted safety and someone that, whether it's dropping back to cover in the flats, if he ends up having to take or, grab onto a tight end or running back that, he's covering a route further down the field, still aspects of his game that he can excel because he is faster. He does have a little bit better ball skills. And from that perspective, that's where I think Jelani can still make an impact, where also something that's really special about Jelani is I think his upside is just higher in terms of his positional versatility and a kind of proficiency, whether you ask him to stop the run or drop back into coverage. Now, again, I mentioned earlier that coverage is going to be an area of improvement for him, but if he's playing this hybrid will linebacker position, I'm not super worried about some flaws in coverage here and there. That will work itself out over time. There's different ways you can mask that in PK's defense, whether it's getting extra safety help, getting a little bit more urgency out of the blitz to rush the passer a little bit more, or to rush the pass a little bit more. There's, like I said, different ways to cover that up. Another, probably more near-term fit, if his coverage skills and just, the pad popping ability, honestly, the tackling ability are the areas of his game that really come along, he could be a boundary safety. He's definitely got the physical tools. The coverage skills aren't quite there yet. I don't know how rangy he could be at that point in the field. I don't know if the feel for the game is quite there yet. He didn't really play a ton of boundary safety by my understanding at Connally, but that could be a fit. Again, I think that's more if the coverage skills end up looking a lot more natural at the next level, and if he just really shows out for the rest of the year, like really in fall camp, kind of has the chops for what you need from a tackling and a coverage perspective and a play recognition from the box perspective at the position. I've heard this mentioned too. I think ultimately the highest upside long-term fit for Jelani will be some type of hybrid will linebacker edge rusher position. That's kind of hard to frame, but there were ways that Texas used DeMarvion Overshown as a hybrid edge rusher during the 2022 season. A lot of delayed blitzes off the edge, some stunts to maybe bring him up the middle and kind of take advantage of that speed that he can have up the gap and just shoot out of a cannon up the middle at opposing quarterbacks. I think there's ways that you can have Jelani doing that. His change of direction, his explosiveness, his flat-out speed, pad popping, physicality, all of that is something that could really be electric if you schemed him up in that way. To kind of come off the line of scrimmage, come out of the box even, if he does end up putting on some weight and can take on those matchups a little bit more effectively. But that's where I really think the long-term upside could be. If Jelani puts on about 30 or 40 more pounds, he's going to have to put on a lot of weight if he does end up being more of an edge rusher type. But, his length and his foot speed, just his overall gifts, I think edge rusher, because he's got a 6'6" wingspan, and he shows a lot of natural pass rushing ability on the limited film he does have. Because, he can really get around tight ends, H-backs in the blink of an eye and get into the backfield. He's got a nose for the quarterback when that's the way he's schemed up. I think it's going to take a while for him to get there at the next level. But again, Texas brought in a lot of edge rushers in this class, so he's got time to develop. I think that's somewhere else that could be a really, really nice fit for him. But anyway, that's pretty much all I got for him. Again, trying to get kind of a quick breakdown on his game and where he fits and what he brings to the table for Texas. ultimately, if I could categorize him, it's probably going to be like a 2 to 3, or a guy that's going to be making an impact more 2 to 3 years down the line on this Texas defense. It's not going to be a right away sort of thing like you might get out of a guy like Anthony Hill or Samaje Burrell, Malik Muhammad, Derek Williams, some of these other highly touted guys in the 2023 class. But Jelani, make no mistake, has a lot of long-term upside. But anyway, like I said, for Andrew Miller, Hook'em Headlines, that is pretty much it. Welcome.